Picture Japan in the late 1500s, an age dominated by way of the code of the samurai, their swords flashing below the growing sun. Now imagine, amongst these warriors, a person who stood aside. Not because of the steel he carried, however, because of the very coloration of his pores and skin. A towering African, broader and stronger than most, darker than every person the human beings of Japan had ever visible. This turned into no legend. This became Yasuke, a man who broke loose from slavery and rose to the impossible rank of samurai. The year became 1579. A Portuguese Jesuit missionary, Alessandro Valignano, stepped onto the beaches of Japan. Beside him walked a man who might all the time alternate records, Yasuke. He became substantial in length, status over 6 feet tall. His skin, darkish as polished ebony, and his commanding presence grew to become heads anywhere he went. The Japanese had never seen everyone like him earlier then. Word unfolded quickly of this mysterious giant. In Kyoto, crowds surged via the streets, eager just to glimpse him. Some whispered he turned into a painted illusion, until bold arms attempted to wash his pores and skin easy, best to realize the color changed into actual. It wasn't long before Yasuke changed into summoned to meet Japan's most effective guy, Oda Nobunaga. Nobunaga became no normal lord. Brilliant, ruthless, and decided, he dreamed of uniting the fractured country under his rule. Yet even he had never witnessed anything like Yasuke. When Yasuke entered the warlord's chamber, silence fell. Nobunaga's retainers stared, wide-eyed. The great lord ordered Yasuke to naked his chest, testing if the color of his pores and skin was truth or trick. And when he saw that it was actual, Nobunaga did something outstanding. He didn't snicker, didn't brush aside him. Instead, he welcomed Yasuke with an experience of recognize. From that moment on, Yasuke turned into no mere servant. Nobunaga turned into intrigue by way of him, his strength, his discipline, his unwavering braveness. In a land where foreigners have been hardly ever trusted, Yasuke became extra than an interloper. He became an associate, and shortly, a warrior. Long earlier than Japan ever spoke his call, Yasuke's journey began under the fierce solar of Africa. Historians still debate his birthplace, a few point to Mozambique, others to Ethiopia, Sudan, or even the Nile's fertile banks. But one factor is positive: he got here from a land rich with kingdoms and empires, a land of warriors and traditions, no longer the wasteland Europe would later try to portray. As a boy, he could have grown up surrounded through rhythm, the drums echoing through the night, markets alive with alternate in salt, ivory, and gold, and elders passing down tales of ancestors who fought bravely below the celebs. In his culture, braveness, loyalty, and honor had been sacred values. These ideals might continue to be with him, shaping every warfare he fought in distant lands. Yet, Africa in the mid-1500s became now not untouched. European ships prowled its coasts. The old routes of change were twisting into something darker, the exchange in human lives. Yasuke became caught in this storm. Some say he changed into taken in a raid, others that he was captured as a warrior. However it took place, one truth is obvious: at the same time as nonetheless a younger man, he became torn from his hometown and dragged into the brutal equipment of the slave change. The journey itself became an ordeal of survival. Shackled, compelled to march to the coast, then thrown aboard a Portuguese ship, Yasuke confronted the limitless ocean. The stench of fear and depression filled the air below deck, and plenty of by no means made it throughout. But Yasuke continued. His power carried him through in which others perished. Fate, but, had chosen a unique avenue for him. Instead of being brought to the plantations of the Americas, Yasuke's direction turned eastward. He came into the provider of Jesuit missionaries, Portuguese clergymen who traveled with both the cross and the pursuits of empire. With them, Yasuke sailed across the Indian Ocean, stepping onto foreign seashores in India, possibly even the trading town of Goa. Everywhere he went, he drew interest. Accounts say Yasuke stood well over 6 feet tall, towering in a world in which maximum men have been some distance shorter. His presence turned into commanding, his skin unlike anything overseas eyes had seen. Crowds accrued just to have a look at him. To many, he was extra than a servant, he became a discern of all. By the early 1570s, Yasuke changed into no longer simply a survivor. He had emerged as a man forged via oceans and cultures, by means of chains and storms. He had visible Africa, India, and the Middle East. He had walked via the chaos of warfare and the uncertainty of faith. And whilst he subsequently set foot in Japan along the Jesuits, he carried no longer simply scars of the past but also the dwelling spirit of Africa within him. For the Japanese, his arrival was a shock unlike anything before. In a country closed to most of the world, Yasuke became a thunderclap. People crowded the streets to look him. Some believed his dark pores and skin turned into painted ink and attempted to clean it away. Others whispered he became a divine being. But among all who noticed him, one man's eyes appeared deeper, Oda Nobunaga, the most effective warlord of Japan. In Yasuke, he did no longer see a foreigner or a servant. He noticed a warrior. The 12 months turned into 1579. Kyoto, the beating heart of Japan, throbbed with life. Merchants shouted their expenses in crowded markets, priests' chants drifted from temple courtyards, and armored samurai clattered via the slender streets. But on one exceptional day, all that noise seemed to vanish. Because into the city walked a person unlike any they had ever seen. Yasuke. He changed into a massive among them, tall, extensive-shouldered, and dark as nighttime. His presence stopped people of their tracks. Children stared extensive-eyed, girls whispered in the back of their sleeves, and men leaned forward to get a better appearance. Some believed his pores and skin were painted with ink. A few even tried to clean it off with buckets of water, most effective to discover the fact, this was no cover. This turned into who he changed into. The Jesuit missionaries visiting with Yasuke Speedy realized the stir had ended up dangerous. The crowds pressed closer, determined to touch him, to show he became actual. What started as fascination threatened to spiral into chaos. To repair order, the Jesuits added Yasuke before the most effective man whose authority ought to silence the rush, the warlord who ruled Kyoto itself. Oda Nobunaga. Nobunaga became not a man without difficulty inspired. Brilliant, ruthless, and formidable, his dream was to unify Japan under his banner. But not like a lot of his peers, he became also deeply curious. He desired to understand the broader world, and he had no time for superstition. When Yasuke changed into presented to him, the ecosystem shifted. Nobunaga studied him cautiously. Unlike the crowds, he did not gasp or snicker. Instead, he ordered proof. Servants brought water and scrubbed Yasuke's pores and skin, his palms, his chest, his face. Yet the coloration by no means faded. It turned into now not paint. It became actual. And for the primary time, Nobunaga smiled. What stood before him became now not an interest, but a man of amazing presence. The Jesuits informed his story, of Africa, of oceans crossed, of survival towards impossible odds. Nobunaga listened closely. Strength. Discipline. Endurance. These were characteristics irreputable particularly else. In that second, Nobunaga made a decision that would change Yasuke's lifestyles. He did no longer see a servant. He did no longer see a overseas spectacle. He noticed a warrior. Yasuke became welcomed into Nobunaga's household. He changed into given best clothes, a residence of his very own, and a ceremonial sword, the mark of honor. For the primary time on account that being torn from Africa, Yasuke became no longer simply enduring his fate. He changed into stepping into history. But Nobunaga's Japan became a land of infinite battles. Castles fell, alliances shattered, and betrayal lingered in each shadow. To stay through Nobunaga's side, Yasuke might need extra than admiration. He must prove himself with mettle. And quickly, the arena would see what this African warrior was genuinely able to. Life in Oda Nobunaga's courtroom changed into unlike anything Yasuke had ever known. The fortress partitions echoed with the crack of wooden swords striking in practice, the low voices of clergymen in prayer, and the consistent shuffle of warriors preparing for war. Samurai in glowing armor strode through the corridors with quiet self-assurance, their katanas flashing within the torchlight. And now, among them, stood Yasuke. At first, the whispers followed him anywhere. He's too overseas. Too abnormal. How may want he recognize Bushido, the manner of the warrior? But Nobunaga silenced the doubt with an unmarried order. Train him. Test him. If he bleeds as we bleed, he is samurai. And so Yasuke educated. Day after day, he took up the timber bakken and stood against pro-combatants. His towering body gave him electricity, his fingers carried crushing strength, but brute pressure alone became now not sufficient. Samurai fight demanded precision, balance, and manage. Yasuke stumbled. He fell hard. He bled regularly. But he by no means quit. The samurai commenced to notice. His patience turned into unmatched. When others collapsed, Yasuke remained on his feet. When knocked down, he rose again, his eyes burning with determination. Doubt turned to admire. The foreigner changed into proving himself, not through phrases, however by mettle and spirit. Then got here the real test. In 1581, Nobunaga marched to conflict towards rival clans. The sound of struggle drums rolled throughout the geographical region, banners whipped inside the wind, and brilliant armies collided in fireplace and fury. Yasuke rode with Nobunaga, now not as a servant, however as a warrior. The battlefield became chaos. Arrows darkened the sky, the clang of metal rang out, and men cried out as they fell. Through it all, Yasuke fought like a hurricane unleashed. Wielding his naginata, a long, curved blade, he cut a direction through the enemy ranks, his big frame towering above the conflict. Samurai who once mocked him now shouted his name as he pushed back wave after wave. Nobunaga saw all of it. And he was satisfied. Yasuke was not a curiosity. He changed into a soldier of subject, loyalty, and ferocity. After the battle, Nobunaga summoned him before the assembled warriors. There, in front of Japan's proudest samurai, Yasuke was given two sacred presents, best gowns and an actual katana. The message became unmistakable. Yasuke changed into no longer an outsider anymore. He changed into samurai. It changed into an honor no African, no foreigner, had ever received in Japan's long records. And it certain Yasuke to Nobunaga in a manner deeper than any oath. From that day on, Yasuke stood at Nobunaga's aspect in councils of conflict, at banquets, and on the battlefield. Across Japan, whispers unfold of the Black Samurai. Some stated he turned into a divine father or mother dispatched by means of the gods. For Yasuke, it was less difficult than that. After years of chains, exile, and wandering, he had eventually observed a home, and a frontrunner worth giving the whole lot for. But loyalty in Nobunaga's Japan turned into a risky aspect. Enemies turned around like wolves, and betrayal crept ever closer. Soon, Yasuke might face a check more than any war, one that might determine the destiny of his master, and of his own soul. The summertime of 1582 carried a weight that no one may want to forget about. Oda Nobunaga had delivered one half of Japan under his manipulate, but his enemies turned around like wolves. Some clans bent the knee out of fear, others submitted to his strength, however in the shadows, whispers of revenge in no way stopped. Yasuke could sense it, the uneasy stillness earlier than a typhoon. At night, while the citadel halls had been quiet, he patrolled in silence, hand resting on his sword, his instincts sharpened with the aid of years of conflict. He had fought beside Nobunaga through countless campaigns, however these days felt distinct. The air changed into thick with betrayal. And in Japan, treachery regularly struck faster than an arrow. That storm came at sunrise, June 21, 1582. Akechi Mitsuhide, one among Nobunaga's relied-on generals, turned traitor. With lightning speed, he added 13,000 infantrymen to surround Honnoji Temple in Kyoto, where Nobunaga turned into resting with most effective a handful of guards. Yasuke changed into there. The temple that once echoed with chants of clergymen and the soft fragrance of incense now roared with chaos. Arrows cut through the air. Flames leapt throughout wooden beams. The cries of battle stuffed every corner. Yasuke fought like a pressure of nature, his blade flashing like lightning, his towering frame cleaving via the traitor's guise. But the tide became not possible to forestall. Inside the temple, Nobunaga realized his destiny. The exceptional warlord, who had made daimyo tremble and reshaped Japan, now faced death now not from foreign invaders but from his very own general's treachery. Wounded and bloodstained, Nobunaga summoned Yasuke to his facet. The room glowed with firelight, smoke curling into the rafters. Nobunaga's eyes, fierce even in his very last moments, locked on Yasuke. "Yasuke," he said firmly, his voice unshaken, "this is my stop. But no longer yours. Live. Carry my story. Carry the honor of the samurai past these flames." Yasuke's coronary heart burned. Every intuition screamed to die beside his master. But Nobunaga shook his head. "Do now not waste your life here. My death is inevitable. Yours isn't." Moments later, as hearth ate up the temple, Nobunaga achieved seppuku, the ritual suicide of the samurai, choosing dying with honor overseas. The global appeared to crumble in hearth and ash. Yasuke, soaking wet in blood and smoke, fought his way through the inferno. But the conflict outside raged on. Mitsuhide's squad eyes swarmed, looking down Nobunaga's men. Yasuke fought like a cornered lion, every strike fueled by using rage and grief. But even his strength could not keep against thousands. Surrounded and exhausted, he becomes sooner or later captured. The enemy jeered. Some cried for his execution. But Mitsuhide hesitated. Killing Yasuke introduced no honor, he changed into too fantastic, too overseas, too unknown. Instead, he was passed over to Jesuit clergymen in Kyoto. And there, history falls silent. Some say Yasuke lived quietly, stripped of his sword, fading into obscurity. Others whisper he again to Africa, wearing memories of fireplace, loyalty, and loss. And nevertheless others believe he wandered Japan as a shadow, a lone warrior without a master. But one fact cannot be erased: Yasuke stood at the very heart of Japan's maximum turbulent age. He fought with honor. He earned the consider of an exquisite warlord. And he carved his call into records. Not as a slave. Not as a foreigner. But as a samurai. When the smoke of Honnoji cleared, Japan itself seemed changed. Nobunaga, the warlord who once bent the country to his will, turned into long gone, struck down not by using a foreign enemy, however by betrayal from inside. Mitsuhide's revolt shook the land like thunder, but his victory became quick. Within days, he too fell, swallowed by means of the infinite cycle of war that defined the age of the samurai. But what of Yasuke? Here, records grows faint, the ink of his story fading like rain on parchment. Records inform us best this: after his capture, Yasuke becomes surpassed to the Jesuit clergyman in Kyoto. Some claimed he changed into spared because he became, not without a doubt Japanese, an interloper of their eyes, no longer bound to the samurai's fate. Others believed he again to the church that had as soon as guided him, his sword taken, his path redirected. But records are most effective half of the story. Legends live longer. In villages, people referred to him for years to come. Children whispered of the towering warrior with pores and skin darkish as night and energy like thunder. They told of the way he fought at Nobunaga's facet, fearless and unyielding, a samurai unlike another. To them, Yasuke turned into no foreigner. He turned into a hero. Some say he again to Africa, wearing scars of warfare and recollections of cherry blossoms drifting inside the wind. Others consider him wandering the streets of Kyoto in silence, a lone shadow who had as soon as stood inside the heart of history. Still others trust he died quietly, his grave unmarked, his name forgotten via guise, however never by means of the spirit of the warrior. The reality is that this, Yasuke's life shattered boundaries. In a time whilst race, kingdom, and start described future, he rose notably. Once introduced in chains, he sat at the desk of lords. Once a servant, he became given land, a blade, and the sacred identify of samurai. That was no longer survival. That become triumph. Centuries later, Yasuke's name nevertheless burns brilliant. Historians look for traces of him. Artists paint his likeness. Writers and filmmakers bring his story return to lifestyles. To the world, he has end up extra than a man. He has turned out to be a image. A image of resilience. A symbol of possibility. A image that greatness knows no coloration, no borders, no chains. Even in silence, Yasuke speaks. He reminds us that records is full of forgotten voices, tales erased, ignored, or buried. When they upward push again, they change the manner we see the past, and the future. In the give up, Yasuke's legacy isn't in how he vanished, however in how he lived. He lived as a samurai. He lived as a warrior. He lived as a person who defied every limit placed upon him. And even though the pages of history can also fade, his spirit endures. With every story retold, every book written, every portrait imagined, Yasuke lives once more, the African who carved his call into the soul of Japan. Not only a reminiscence of the past, but a legend forever.